understand. So, we can start with the questions.
Yeah.
Please, United Nations Correspondent Association.
Foreign Minister Lavrov, welcome back to the United Nations. On behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, thank you so much for doing this briefing. My name is Sherwin Briceby, South African Broadcasting. US officials have for months accused Russia of undercutting UN sanctions against the DPRK, a claim also given voice this week by none other than the President of the United States when he said, quote, Russia is not helping us at all with North Korea. Your foreign ministry earlier today said Russia was, remains, and will continue to be committed to its responsibilities on all international agreements. What are we then, sir, to make of the President of the United States' claims?
Выбирайте, кому верить.
Please choose whom to trust. If our American colleagues are telling everyone that we're not cooperating, we're saying that we are cooperating, and please do give us some facts that would confirm a certain shortcomings on our behalf in regard to implementation of the UN Security Council resolutions. Unfortunately, in many other situations, when we were also accused of different sins, including the interference in the inner affairs of all states on the planet with no exception, no one has given us any facts. They're saying that we do have information, but it is secret. It's confidential. We remember how one of our favorite actors, Arnold Schwarzenegger, said, trust me, also without any facts. Now, let's use this principle then, let's work with it, and I don't think we can achieve a lot when we follow such rules. We need facts in order to have a specific, thorough negotiations and discussions. If we go back to the crux of the matter about the DPRK and sanctions of the UN Security Council, there is a special committee at the UN Security Council, and it is created to review any issues, any complaints whatsoever. If there are no complaints applied to this committee, then there are no specific facts. There is nothing else I can add.
Жанна Агалакова, первый.
Zhana Galakova, First Channel. Sergey, Mr. Lavrov, thank you for this opportunity. Today, Pentagon has published a new defense strategy, national defense strategy, of the U.S., saying that now fighting terrorism is on the back burner, and right now the U.S. have at the forefront the competition between different countries, and now competition between Russia and China is the most important one. So officially we are now adversaries. Could you please comment? I believe that China is mentioned in the first place as an aggressive economic power. We are mentioned second as the country which is violating certain rules of the game. And together with China, as it is said in the strategy, we're undercutting this international system from inside. You know, in any country, the military want to give the basis for additional financial resources. I think we have to consider that as well. But it is regrettable that instead of having a normal dialogue, instead of using the basis of international law, the U.S. are indeed striving to prove their leadership through such confrontational strategies and concepts. It is also said that after the Second World War, the U.S., together with their allies, created a new world order, and Russia and China are now undercutting it. Well, out of sheer politeness, they could have remembered that the UN, as it is right now, and as it is the world order, was created with immediate participation of the Soviet Union, of our country. But I'd like to repeat, we're open for dialogue. We're prepared to discuss military doctrines as well, as it used to be when the militaries of two countries were strengthening confidence. And I'm positive that in any case, in the United States, there are a lot of people with common sense who understand that strategic stability has to remain in place. All risks for such order have to be curbed, and it is impossible without participation of the U.S. and Russia.
Thank you so much, Abdul Hamid Sayama from Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Mr. Foreign Minister, you know that the U.S. now is not an acceptable peace broker in the Middle East. My first question is, can Russia fill the void? Can Russia, maybe with China, become the new peace broker between Israel and Palestine? The second question, you know there is an attempt now to destroy UNRWA. I mean, the U.S. decided to withhold all its contribution. UNRWA has been serving about 5 million Palestinian refugees. What suggestion you have? Can you help? Can Russia fill at least some of those lost contributions? Thank you very much.
As for being a broker between Palestinian and Israeli, Russia never was wrong, and it never was trying to shy away from being a broker in this peace process. And after 2 years, we saw there was interest from Israeli and Palestinians, and we suggested that Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Mahmoud Abbas to meet in Russia without any preconditions. This suggestion remains in force, and as far as I understand, Palestinian president is prepared for such a meeting. We had contacts both with the leadership of Israel and Palestine, and probably we heard it firsthand what kind of opportunities we have in order to find a way out of this very bad situation. As for UNRWA, Russia is a contributor. However, we cannot compare our modest contribution with the U.S. contributions. And this decision to stop contributions and then to pay only half of them, indeed, that undermines in a serious way the efforts to satisfy the needs of Palestinian refugees in the region. We'll consult all stakeholders and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foreign Minister Talal Haj from Al Arabiya and Al Hadath. How do you view the call by the Special Envoy Stefan de Mistura to hold talks in Vienna on the 25th on constitution, something that you in Russia were planning to discuss on the 29th and 30th in Sochi? And is that still on track, or are you going to once again delay it till February, especially taking into account the boycott by most of the HNC groups, including the Moscow and the Cairo platforms, to take part in that conference of the National Dialogue of Syrians?
Я вижу
What I see is that these events are complementary. I'd like to remind you that the efforts that were undertaken by us a little more than a year ago with Iran and Turkey, the efforts that have led us to what we now know as Astana process, they have in a major way stimulated the UN in order to renew active work. Before the Astana meeting was announced, I think that's December 2016, for more than 10 months, UN was doing nothing. And they postponed and postponed rounds of negotiations. So Astana is a serious stimulus for the Geneva process. And just like that, in the previous month, for many months, the UN personnel had such a moderate position. They were waiting for our Saudi colleagues to unite as Riyadh, Moscow, and Cairo groups, which was done with our active support. We welcome that. However, the round of negotiations was announced only after we have announced such an initiative to conduct a Syrian national dialogue in Sochi. In Vienna, there are oppositioners gathering from three mentioned groups, whom our Saudi colleagues have united quite successfully. However, they did not get from all these delegates a refusal from any preconditions, and I hope that Vienna will not see the repeating of the practice of the previous round of negotiations when the leadership of the delegations was asking for the change of regime before getting down at the negotiation table. I hope that will not be repeated. In any case, Geneva and Vienna sees opposition represented by three groups. They consist of people who live abroad and have been living for quite a while outside of Syria. And if we are serious about this matter, I believe that work on the constitution has to engage the whole spectrum of Syrian society, all sectarian, all ethnic groups, women, civil society, and so on and so forth. This is the initiative of calling the Congress in Sochi. We have invited about 1,500 representatives of the Syrian population, including sheikhs, heads of tribes, the tribal chiefs, representatives of civil society, who in any case are going to live in the country, who never left the country, and they're interested in their voice next to the immigrant voices to be heard as well when the work on the new constitution is prepared. This is the goal of our Congress, and we want as the outcome for these countries for Staffan de Mistura to have a recommendation on who else can be a part of the Constitutional Committee. Of course, the UN will choose that as it is written down in the UN Security Council Resolution 2254.
That the participation of the HNC,
Они приглашены туда.
They are invited there. Let's wait for the results and then we'll talk about it.
Елена Черненко, газета «Коммерсант».
Kommersant newspaper, Mr. Lavrov, Kazakhstan. Good afternoon, Mr. Lavrov. My name is Shamshur Hamroshan. I represent Kazakhstan TV channel. Thank you for the opportunity to ask you a question. As you know, recently there was a visit of Mr. Nazarbayev to the US. One of the questions for discussions between the presidents was the relations between Russia and the US. What do you think? Can Kazakhstan be a mediator for improving the relations between two countries? And the second question, what kind of significance do you attribute to Kazakhstan in the UN Security Council? Now, as for mediators, well, frankly speaking, we have direct contacts between Russia and Washington at the presidential level, at the level of the heads of foreign ministries and the State Department. Since Rex Tillerson became the head of the State Department, we have met about 8 times, and probably the same goes for the telephone conversations. So we welcome the desire of President Nazarbayev and other leaders of other countries, we welcome their desire to see better relations between Russia and the US, better than the state they're in right now, but it probably does not depend on the quality and the number of mediators. That depends on the preparedness of the US to conduct a dialogue on the mutual respectful basis and with equal footing, and the preparedness of capability of Mr. Trump to counter the domestic intrigues which are directed first and foremost against him per se, where such intrigues are using the Russophobic, playing the Russophobic card. We see that all problems are blamed on Russia, and this domestic political life is using Russophobic card for bad purposes. But I'm positive that the time of those who use such practices will pass, and the US will recognize that it is in their vested interest to develop relations with the Russian Federation, also considering the international security, which is so concerning today. Kommersant newspaper. Thank you. Mr. Lavrov, the response of the European capitals to the Ukrainian law on the Donbass reintegration was quite neutral, but Russia was had a bad reaction about it. What will be the consequences of such law? Now, if we take a legal look at this reintegration law, it scratches the Minsk agreements, the agreements which were endorsed through the UN Security Council resolutions in a few days after the meeting of 4 leaders of the Normandy 4 in Minsk. For us, it is apparent. As for reaction, I have said many a time that we have no doubts, and moreover, we have trustworthy knowledge that Europe and Washington do understand very well what kind of game the current Kiev authorities are playing, and what kind of course they're undertaking in order to protract the implementation of the Minsk agreements, their obligations. And during our context behind closed doors, all Normandy 4 and Washington are saying, transmitting this signal to Kiev. However, these authorities are absolutely incapable of negotiating, but the West cannot publicly criticize what their pet project is doing. Of course, it can be explained. It has to do with a certain sense of prestige and reputation. We will strive for everything that is enshrined in Minsk agreements to be implemented. And the efforts to change the goals and the purposes and to get the conversations away from the crux of the matter, trying to find new ideas, will be in favor of the just package that where Mr. Poroshenko has signed and the leaders of Donetsk republics.
BBC here. You said that if the United States actually violates the JCPOA, the Iran deal, that it has grave consequences for North Korea and generally international agreements like that. But is there a possibility, under what circumstances can this agreement be saved without the United States in it? Is there discussions with the Europeans to come up with a formula where, reimposing of sanctions and violating it by Mr. Trump would not kill the deal in 120 days?
Well, this agreement cannot be implemented if one of the participants unilaterally steps out of it. It will fall apart. There will be no deal then. And that's the assumption that we take, and I believe that everyone understands that, especially our European colleagues. And as far as I know, the United States are going to try to convince the European states to take the same position that the Washington has taken. This is a decisive moment, and you have said quite justified. The Northern Korea looks at what is happening with Iran. What was the matter with the deal, that if Iran refuses to have the military nuclear program, and then the sanctions are lifted, and the same can be expected of North Korea. However, if this Iranian deal becomes a token in the geopolitical games, how can we ask North Korea to use the same option?
Yes. The leaders of the United States have said that their forces are only in Syria for the purpose of fighting against the ISIS terrorists. But now we hear statements to the effect of that if they pull their forces out, this could then strengthen the Syrian government. How are you dealing with these mixed messages from your American colleagues?
Но это не единственное.
This is not the only topic where we have mixed messages, contradictory messages. A few days ago, Americans have declared of creating trans-border security forces, and now they said that we misunderstood them. They're not creating any types of forces, but the U.S. are trying to form an alternative bodies of authority on the vast territory, parts of the Syrian territory. That is a fact, and that does contradict their own obligations, which they have undertaken many times, including the UN Security Council, to the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Syria. And we're troubled by that. I have discussed it many times with Rex Tillerson. We have discussions at expert and military level. We have permanent contacts. We're asking these questions. But I agree with you, this incoherence and the lack of a principled commitment to what we negotiate is very typical for the current American diplomacy, including the instances, the reasons of American staying in Syria and the reasons for the U.S.-led coalition's actions. Rex Tillerson has said many times that the only goal, the only reason is to defeat ISIL. Now they have even more far-reaching plans, and we'll have to keep that in mind and try to find ways that would prevent from undercutting the sovereignty of the Syrian state.
Mr. Foreign Minister Iftikhar Ali from Associated Press of Pakistan, Afghanistan. Sir, the American ambassador in Afghanistan, in Kabul, today denied that United States was helping or supporting ISIS or Daesh. Since you have deep knowledge of Afghanistan, what is your stand whether the United States is supporting Daesh in Afghanistan?
Знаете,
You know, there are many leaks regarding the relations of the militaries which are heading the coalition in Syria, of the militaries working in Iraq. Sometimes they're saying that sometimes the U.S. are turning a blind eye to terrorist groups and let them leave. This is what happened during the Deir ez-Zor battle, where our militaries used the military channels with the United States Army, and they were saying that the terrorist fighters are moving around the Iraqi border and tried to prevent them from leaving, but the U.S. refused to do so. They said that if they do not shoot, they're not terrorists. This is quite a strange attitude. As for Afghanistan, for several months now, we had an application to the Security Council and to the U.S. The leaders of many Afghanistan provinces said that they have seen many times helicopters with no responders, transponders, and they were moving towards the territory controlled by ISIL in Afghanistan. We filed an application. We had no response, but the mystery remains. It seems that the helicopters were not the helicopters used by the Afghanistan army, so only a coalition can have helicopters. What they were doing in the territories where the ISIL is at large, we would like to know. Well, since we started this topic, going back to Syria, for many years, starting with the period when this conflict was just fledgling, I was talking to John Kerry, and talking about many facts proving that the U.S.-led coalition is not against Jabhat and Nusra. And still this problem remains. The coalition led by Washington is not fighting al-Nusra. And this is bad because al-Nusra, just like ISIL, is on the list of the UN Security Council of the terrorist designated list.
Foreign Minister Michelle Nichols from Reuters. Just a follow-up to the questions on the Iran nuclear deal. President Trump has said that unless the deal is renegotiated or amended in some way, the US will pull out. Russia yourself said on Monday that the deal could not be renegotiated. Do you think the Iran nuclear deal is dead? And a question on Myanmar. What is your reaction to the arrest and detention of 2 Reuters reporters in Myanmar? Thank you.
Now, as for whether the nuclear deal, Iran nuclear deal, is dead, well, not yet. It's not dead yet. As far as I understand, President Trump said that till the next review, which is going to take place in 2 or 3 months, he's going to take the final decision whether this deal will be renegotiated, so some concessions will be made for him, or he will step out of this deal. We're going to take some serious efforts for this effort not to be renegotiated, not to touch this thing. It cannot keep alive in a renegotiated form, especially regarding the demands by the United States. It would not be acceptable for Iran, and it is clear now, I believe, that Europeans do understand this danger right now. As for Myanmar activities, honestly, I did not follow the specific fact that you have mentioned, but I proceed from the assumption that all issues with minorities have to be solved peacefully and in accordance with the international humanitarian law.
Activities in the Middle East.
You know, probably this is not the right wording, what you mean. Cooperating with the United States and with other external players, with the regional powers in settlement of the Middle Eastern issues, we always prepare for that, and we value the dialogue which is taking place in these complicated times. However, if I understood your question correctly, but all issues of the Middle East are seen as stopped by the fact that Iran is not settling them. It is not right. This is not right. Iran is a large power, and asking Iran from not getting into anything, it is impossible, because any large power, be that Iran or Saudi Arabia, even a small power, Qatar, for example, they all have interests. Somewhere they're legitimate interests, somewhere maybe not so legitimate. We have to deal with that. Now, the time does not allow us to make simple decisions. Iran is to blame, let's lock Iran in its borders and everything will solve itself. That is not so. We have been proposing for quite a while for this key standoff, key issues between Saudi Arabia and Iran to start overcoming these hardships. And we're endorsing for the Gulf Cooperation Council to start talks with Iran, with the support of Russia, the United States, European Union, China, the League of Arab States, the Islamic Cooperation Organization, a sort of a Helsinki process which have led to creation of the OSCE creation, starting with the confidence-building measures, with transparency. It is possible to create an atmosphere which would be more conducive to solving issues of the region on the balance, using the balance of interest, not through blaming someone in all sins.
Questions? Yes, please.
Thank you, Maria. Mr. Foreign Minister, you have been blamed, as you say here in America, for a lot of things. The Western America also blames you for your role in Balkans. What is your role in Balkans, and how significant is that area for Russia at this moment?
Not only Balkans, we're also blamed in interference in Mexico, I believe, somewhere else. The Balkans are traditionally our close friends. The Balkan states and Balkan nations, we have common history, common fight, including the fight for independence of the Balkan states, where Russia has given a very significant contribution. We have common spiritual roots, we have common religion, and we want to continue to be friends with the Balkan states. I do not see any other role. For example, well, by the way, talking about Serbia, there is such a Russia-Serbian humanitarian center in the city of Niš. I think there are 8 Russians working there and about 10 Serbs as personnel. What they're doing is that they're monitoring the situation with emergencies, and when there are some kind of catastrophes and natural disasters, they're helping to mitigate them. They're putting out fires, they're directing special aviation there, and the center has provided help to many countries, not only Serbia, but also Montenegro and even more to the west. Now, the American ambassador in Belgrade has asked publicly from the Serbian leadership not to sign an agreement about the privileges and immunity to the staff of this center. He's asking publicly of that because allegedly this is a spy nest. Well, I'm almost quoting here, and we should not, they should not be cooperated with. Well, say this privileges and immunity for Americans and citizens of other states, of NATO member states, when they conduct maneuvers on the territory of Serbia. No, there is no question about that. It is so politically jaundiced. Iran is to blame in the Middle East, but we're also to blame there as well. We're to blame everywhere. So now Serbia is being blamed for everything what is happening in the Balkans. And now Montenegro stopped mentioning the Russian trace in the events which were so vocally concerned. I believe that the sobering will come. In the Balkans, we have to cooperate just like we cooperated when Dayton agreements were agreed upon, which are still the basis for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And there are many other examples when we, together with our Western colleagues in other countries, including Turkey, used to cooperate in order to normalize the situation in this or other part of the Balkan Peninsula.
So just a follow-up, do you think that Dayton II, as somebody, even American Congressman Turner, was advocating for, what do you think about Dayton II idea?
First, we need to know what is meant by that. I have not heard about it. If we want to rewrite Dayton, then we're against that. I believe that Bosnia will not stand up to such a challenge if we start to break its statehood again.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News, and thank you for the briefing. Given what you said today in all of these answers and on Monday about the destabilizing aspect of U.S. policy and the ultimatums that are issued, does the Russian Federation, do you believe the U.S. is losing global leadership on key issues or in key conflict areas? Thank you.
You know, I proceed from the assumption that in today's world, the leadership can only be a collective thing. And there is a lot of examples of proof for that. The G20 creation reflects the fact that we need to create a collective agenda using the leaders of all regions of the world. And the same goes to the fight against terrorism. We need collective efforts. And the leaders in this fight against terrorism, according to all decisions made in the UN, belongs to the UN. The UN is playing the coordinating role, and we all have to help the organization. And such a powerful country as the US can indeed do a lot of beneficial things in eliminating terrorism. We're interested in coordinating our actions. We have a channel of communications channel between militaries on Syria, and largely this interaction has helped the fact that ISIL as a caliphate did not take place. However, separate terrorist fighters and in significant numbers continue to move around the region, and there is a remaining threat. So we are in favor of solving all issues together. And how these or other actions of the U.S. on the global arena are seen, well, you probably will draw your own conclusions, whether this is in line with the potential of the U.S., whether this is in line with the U.S. interests and not in the interests of unilateral geopolitical projects.
In Syria, can I question about Afrin in Syria? Mr. Foreign Minister, this is Majid Ghali from Rodau Media Network. Apologies. As you saw in the reports, a Turkish official said that Russia right now is withdrawing its observers from the city of Afrin in preparation for a Turkish operation. Is that true? What do you think about Turkey's threat to
These messages were later rebuked. Right now, our main task with Turkey and Iran is to ensure a fully functioning de-escalation zone in Idlib. Unfortunately, our Turkish partners have not yet put all checkpoints that they were supposed to create according to the agreement. I think they're supposed to be about 23, 24 checkpoints. However, they have created only a few. And according to our evaluation, the lack of such a fully fledged system, which Turkey is supposed to create, was the reason for active terrorist actions who tried to attack Khmeimim Russian military base. We're talking with our Turkish colleagues quite recently, a few days ago. We continue active contacts through diplomatic channels and through military channels. I believe that we can settle these issues, and the de-escalation zone will ensure stability in this very important region. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you.